thank you again so much to all of you for being here. And we're so happy to have you join us here at MusiCares in collaboration with Sober 21. We know your time is very precious, and so we're just grateful that you're able to carve out some time to be a part of this conversation. For those who are new to MusiCares and unsure of who we are and what we do, we are the charitable branch of the Recording Academy, aka the Grammys. We provide a safety net for the music community when in time of need. And we have three main branches under the umbrella of MusiCares. The first, which I'm a part of, is mental health and addiction services. We provide financial assistance from coaching, individual therapy, support groups, inpatient, outpatient. We will help you get the treatment that you need and provide financial assistance to get that treatment. Another branch under MusiCares is health services, where we will provide financial assistance for medical and dental care. And our third branch is human services, where we provide financial support for any sort of basic living needs. So that could be rent, helping pay mortgage, car payments, insurance premiums, funeral expenses. We are here to help anyone and everyone in the music community. The work that we do is so vital. And we're grateful for anyone who has contributed to MusiCares and the Recording Academy and the work that we're able to do. To introduce myself, my name is Brendan Berry. I'm a client manager in the Mental Health and Addiction Services Department at MusiCares. I'm also a master's level music therapist, board certified and licensed in the state of New York. I'm also a Grammy-winning artist and been in long-term recovery myself for 16 years. I'm a mental health and addiction specialist. So moving along, I wanted to give a moment for Elia Einhorn, the amazing creator of Sober 21, to introduce us to himself and the work that he did on Sober 21, what that was. And then Elia, if you want to introduce the other panelists, that would be amazing.
Hey, what's up? Thanks, Brendan. It's so rad to be with you, man. I'm Elia. I host Pitchfork Radio and TV and Sonos Radio and a ton of other stuff. I was a touring musician for 10 years, songs in all the biggest shows. And now what I focus on outside of my work on the radio side is helping musicians get sober. And Sober 21 is a zine that I put out through the Creative Independent in 2021, last year, with 21 musicians' stories. They're sharing their experience and strength and really the motivations that got them sober and that kept them sober. And we had some amazing people come through. Aside from the folks on the Zoom, Peter Hook came through. We had Nile Rodgers come through. We had Painted Zeros, Jen Champion. So it was this huge swath of folks of different ages, amounts of time sober, gender identity, racial identity. It was really a powerful thing. And for anyone who'd like to get one of these, you can feel free to DM me for the book copy. It's also a free download through the Creative Independent. But I've been sober 25 years now, and it really occurred to me that I needed to give something back in a codified way. And so hence Sober 21. I'd like to introduce a couple of folks who joined us for that. One of my favorite artists is Maluka. She came up with huge club banging hits and, early on worked with a lot of the Mad Decent crowd. Most recently, and it's been a second, I got to see her playing a headlining sold out show with Robin at Madison Square Garden. So that was pretty dope. Maluka, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So
Wow,
good to
you're an
see
old
you.
timer. I didn't know that.
Yeah, 25 years sober. It got me young. I was on the fast train. And our other panelist today is an artist that, of course, people recognize around the world. He sold millions of records and revolutionized what club music can be. Moby, thanks for joining, man. Good to see you.
Oh, nice to see you as well.
Yeah. So psyched to be here with you. And Brendan, I know you've got some thoughts for us all to talk about, so I'll turn it back over to you, man.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Elia, for the work that you've done. You continue to do. I've known you for a long time, and you're a huge inspiration to me. And I know so many other artists who are in recovery themselves and those who are trying to achieve some recovery in their lives. Yeah, this is an incredible opportunity for some artists to be able to share some insights into what your journeys have looked like. I know that you all have been very open about those experiences. And so, the first question I wanted to pose and see if each of you could give an answer to is what recovery means to you, first and foremost. And if Elia, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, recovery on the base level for me is staying sober, right? And then it builds from there, because one thing I realized is you don't just get sober and life is perfect, right? I mean, life's never perfect, but the vicissitudes of life continue. And so, my relationship with recovery now comes down to the sadly cliche and rhyming little saying, I came for my drinking, I stayed for my thinking. So I'm still, my work with musicians is still to keep me sober and to keep me sane. Yeah.
Amazing. Moby, what does recovery mean to you?
Well, that's a gigantic question. I mean, my only claim to fame as far as sobriety goes is I have what I think originally was the earliest sobriety age of anyone I've ever heard of. I first got sober when I was 12 years old, because I'd started drinking and doing drugs when I was around 9 or 10. And when I was 12, a friend of mine almost died because we had been drinking and taking drugs that he stole from his sister, who was in a mental institution in Connecticut. And I remember being 12 years old and watching him being intubated by EMTs. And so I got sober. Clearly it didn't last. And I spent 30 years basically in and out, getting sober, going back out, and finally October 2008, I got sober for real. And so what recovery means to me is, because I could ramble on about this forever because I'm old and opinionated, but at its core, like if I had to boil it down, it's simply the willingness to look at and live according to evidence. It's empirical. It's supported by empiricism, because for years, and I'll try and keep this brief because I don't want to be an old timer rambling on, but for years, I was like, oh, maybe I'm not an alcoholic. Maybe I'm not an addict. Maybe my behavior is ethical, when all the evidence supported was the exact opposite. And sobriety, for me, the core of it is the willingness to be as honest as possible and look at actual evidence around addiction, but also just around behavior and thinking and choices and relationships. So that's my sadly long-winded answer to your nice, succinct question.
No, it was a great answer. Thank you. Maluka, how about you?
Well, sobriety for me also means putting the drink and the drugs down and getting sober, going to meetings, helping others, doing I work a 12-step program, so doing the 12 steps. But recovery too for me is also recovering like my personality, like getting a life back, getting my family back, getting my friends back, getting my career back. I remember when I too was in and out for a very long time. I wasn't getting sober at 12. My journey started at 12, but I had been in and out for like, I don't know, 9 or 10 years. But and I got 8 years in May. But when I first got sober this time around, my mom said, she was like, you remind me of like the 5-year-old you. Like, I love being around you. And yeah, for me, it's just like getting me back, like the real me.
That gives me a shiver. That's amazing.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Natalie. Yeah, super powerful. One of the most fragile parts of recovery are those early days, that point right before getting sober, right? Where we're on the cusp of life and death at times, on the cusp of, do's and don'ts. And then once we've entered that realm of, okay, I'm going to give this thing a shot, it's so fragile. And so challenging in so many ways. So I wanted to know, if each of you could maybe share a bit about what those moments were like for you right before entering sobriety. And obviously, it's not linear. It's not, I got sober and that was the end of it. Now I'm sober for the rest of my life. That's, it can still be a roller coaster. We might drink again, we might use again, and then, get back to a place of abstinence. But what did that look like for you? And what were those early days like?
I'll jump in first on that.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it looked like staring down the barrel of a gun with the fact that I may have to be institutionalized for a long time / the fear was the rest of my life. I mean, I was sincerely afraid that I had lost my mind, sincerely afraid that it was totally, that I'd really cooked it with too many drugs. And it's interesting because, as is so often the case in life, the thing that felt so horrible to me at the time, which was the crushing fear, actually became the fuel that kept me going in sobriety during the difficult times when, in the beginning, I got diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, an obsessive compulsive disorder, this stuff that I didn't know I had before. And, maybe I was medicating, right? But it was a lot of fear. And it was, I don't know, I don't like the implications of the word faith in the religious sense, but it was a faith that whatever was out there was better than whatever I was running from. So even if it really sucked, whatever it was going to be better than the state that I was in right before getting sober.
Right. Moby or Maluka?
I'll throw it to Moby because I remember, Moby, you telling me a funny story of you sabotaging Debbie Harry's show to try to get drugs from the audience in Sober 21.
Yeah.
So I know a little bit about what it looked like for you.
And that wasn't even one of my low moments. Like, it was a fundraiser at the Highline Ballroom, I believe in 2006 or 2007. And I really needed drugs. No one would sell me drugs. So I walked on stage during the fundraiser and interrupted Miss Guy and Debbie Harry were playing a song, and I stopped them, took the microphone, and I said, if anyone here has drugs, please sell me drugs. And I went and stood on the side of the stage, and some kid offered to sell me weed. And I was like, that's not a drug. That's like glaucoma medicine. And so I got back on stage, took the microphone again and yelled at the audience for not having real drugs. I was like, you fucking hipsters, you think you're all so cool. Like, none of you have real drugs. And I was so disappointed in my city, in New York. I was like, come on, like, where's the world of Johnny Thunders and Alan Vega? But as I said, that wasn't even a low moment. Like, that's a fun anecdote. But what I can say is, because I got sober so many times, what I can say is what made October 2008 different from the other times, and basically it was nothing dramatic. It was simply the realization that I was done. Every other time there was like that little glimmer of like, well, maybe I could drink less. Maybe I'll only do drugs with certain types of people. Maybe, like there was always a qualification to using. And then finally, October 2008, I was like, oh, I'm an addict and I'm done. And there was, once I finally admitted that to myself, had that core realization, that's what made the commitment to the work so important. Because before that, I was like, well, I don't really have to do the work because I might not be an addict. So it's kind of like when I work with newcomers, when I work with sponsees, really the only question I ever care about is, are you an addict? Do you fully accept that you're an addict? And if the answer is, well, maybe, I'm like, we can't work together. Like, the only way they're going to do the work is if they have truly bottomed out and truly, to the core of their being, accepted that they're an addict. Otherwise it's like, it's just a hobby. And I know that because for me, for decades, that's who I was.
Thank you.
So, my the last time I drank, it was like what was it, Labor Day weekend of 2014, and I woke up and I saw a text message from my drug dealer, and he says, "You're a whore and God hates you." Like, maybe I should get sober. Maybe I should try those meetings again. I remember telling myself, maybe I need to go back to those meetings and maybe I should try doing the steps. Like, I was like a cha-cha stepper. I would do one, two, three, and cha-cha out. And, I was just so delusional. And even then, when 8 years ago, I said, like deep down inside, I knew I was an alcoholic, but I just had no other solution on how to live life. I was terrified. So 8 years ago, I said, Coke is really like the drugs are making me crazy and the alcohol is leading to the drugs, but I don't have an alcohol problem. I have a drug problem. And it wasn't until like a few months into my sobriety where I told my best friend I was living next door to her, and I was like, if I wasn't living next door to you, I wouldn't have gotten sober or something like that. Oh, the best thing that happened to me is living next door to you. And she looked at me like I was crazy, and she was like, the best thing that happened to you was like you stopped drinking and you got sober. And it just like we were like walking down 8th Avenue in Hell's Kitchen, and it just rushed over me like the reason I didn't know the reason why I wasn't showing up to life was because of alcohol. I just thought the drugs were sending me to psych wards, you know. Um, so yeah, and then like my first few months, was like, I mean, I was delusional. I was like, I lived in Hell's Kitchen, and I was like, I'm not going to meetings on 42nd Street because they're crackheads. you know, Delusional. I'm like, me too. But, of course, I started going to meetings in that area, and it saved my life. Like, they saved my life.
It's so funny. I will say, like, I've been in recovery areas sort of with literally the biggest rock stars in the world, names that your grandmother would know, our grandmothers would know. And the dude who is begging for change outside my local 7-Eleven, right? It's so wild once you realize it's all the same. It's all the same disease. Yeah.
Amazing. Just to kind of like give a snapshot, more so like on the emotional state of those first, 2, 3, 6 months. What were you going through during that time, and how did you manage those feelings in those early days, months, weeks of sobriety?
Uh,
Yeah, that's a tough one. Um,
um, I don't know. I was on a magical pink carpet ride for the first 3 months. I was like, this is great. I feel amazing. And then I got into a relationship, and I wouldn't suggest that. They don't suggest that, but I did it anyways because I know better. I know. And that was horrible. That was like nothing horrible happened, but it was just I didn't know I didn't know what I liked to wear. I didn't know I feel like I just woke what's that movie with the guy that he gets like buried in a time capsule?
Oh
Encino
man, I
Man?
don't know this one.
Was that Encino Man?
Encino Man. I felt like Encino Man. Like I just like all the restaurants that I liked were closed. Like I didn't know what was, I didn't know, and I felt just. I mean, by 9 months, I hadn't had a sponsor, and I was like Googling, I'm going crazy, newly sober, going crazy. Like, is this normal? Like, I thought, you know, um, I thought I was just like terminally unique, and people in my home group were like, you need a sponsor. And this one guy wrote on a piece of paper, and he said, hold this piece of paper. And he took a picture of me with the paper, and he sent it to his girlfriend because she had a bunch of time. And the girlfriend replied, yes. And on the paper it said, would you be my sponsor? But yeah, it was rough, like not having a sponsor for all that time and just going to meetings.
well, I Yeah, sort of to reiterate that, I got really lucky because when I finally, you know, I think it was October 18th, 2008, I walked into Living Now on First Avenue and I said, I was done. I was like, I sat there on a little metal folding chair and I started crying and I was like, I'm done. Like, I've been trying to do this for a long time, but I can't keep doing this. And I was finally done with being out there. And to your question about the emotion is, for me, it was the fear of giving up the familiar, you know, because I had decades of using alcohol and drugs to make everything okay, you know, and it was so predictable and so easy to access. You know, like if anything was going wrong personally, spiritually, with relationships, with work, you walk into a bar and you drink and then you buy drugs. Like, it fixed everything and it was easy. And it was giving that up was so scary. And I got so lucky because on my first day of real sobriety, a friend of mine said, here's your sponsor. Like, she didn't even say, do you need a sponsor? She didn't say, what kind of sponsor do you want? She was like, here's your sponsor. And I thought this guy was such an old timer because he had 14 months of sobriety. And I was like, that's not even, I can't even conceive of that. And he came from the punk rock world, but his program was very old school. So on day one, he had me doing the steps. And that structure, the meeting with him every day, talking to him every day, without that, I would have gone back out because it's so hard. And I will say this to any newcomers who might be watching, giving up the familiar, even if it's destroying you, is really, to state the obvious, it's really hard. You know, like, the familiar is the familiar and it works even if it's killing you. And I have to say, giving that up for the unknown is terrifying and is one of the reasons why I think so many people go back out.
It's interesting to hear you two speak back to back on that, because you both kind of share two things. Like, one is this idea that you are shedding the old system, and the other is that you are instituting a new system that has regular check-ins. You know, you talk about sponsors and meetings and stuff. And, you know, I know for me, during those first few months, I went to rehab. It was an outpatient rehab. So first it was intensive outpatient, IOP, for maybe 6 weeks, and then OP, which was a couple days a week, for another 6 weeks. And, you know, they brought 12-step meetings into the center, and that was my introduction to those. But one of the things that my therapist, or my the sort of woman running the program there, Pam Cost, who I'm still in touch with, I called her on my 25th anniversary. But one thing she said is, you're going to have to change people, places, and things. And that's the first time I'd heard that expression. And I feel like Maluka and Moby are both kind of touching on that. It's like, you know, you really do have to change a ton, and you do need a new system. On the other hand, I mean, I got to say, for people who are watching and who are newer and are thinking, is my life over? It's absolutely not. I mean, all four of us speaking today have these incredibly rich lives and are like super in music, you know, in the scene, like doing stuff that is, at least to me, very meaningful in the arts. And like, I mean, me and Maluka met through LCD Sound System, you know, so it's not like we both got sober and sat in our closets and just were like, oh, life's over, you know. It's just not how it works.
To your earlier point about the sort of eclectic demographic diversity of meetings, like, when I started going to meetings there, it was in a yoga studio, in a Krishna temple, and there were, like, you know, one of my best friends in the meeting was literally a circus freak covered with tattoos who weighed about 400 pounds, sitting next to investment bankers, sitting next to homeless guys, sitting next to movie stars, I mean, like, it sort of ties into that question. The demographics kind of kept me coming back. So I was like, I'm going to show up every day for my spiritual life, for my sobriety, but also to see what weird batch of people are going to show up today. And you're like, oh, there's the movie star from my favorite movie from 1976 sitting next to a homeless guy who has not bathed in 6 months. You know, like, sitting next to the most attractive tattoo-covered person I've ever seen, who I'll never date, but I will have a crush on from afar. Like,
Right.
that diversity was really compelling, especially in the early days.
Oh, absolutely. And the guy that your friend, I also know him, and he's like
Yeah.
the sweetest person ever. And he very much so welcomed me when I was, just in and out. But yeah, me too. I mean, I thought, um, like I said before, I thought I was, what is it? So unique. I'm like, Dominican girls don't get sober. Like, I'm the only freak who didn't get it together. And you walk into Living Now, and it was like, I grew up in the East Village, and it was just like everyone is there from all walks of life, and I saw people who looked like me getting sober. And I was just like, well, okay, I can do this, and it's still a very much eclectic, um, unique meeting. I mean, it's just such a beautiful meeting.
Yep.
And I love that
100%.
we're talking about this side of recovery. I mean, one thing that I heard early on is like, just because you don't like a certain bar doesn't mean you don't like drinking. And just because you don't like a certain group of people in recovery doesn't mean you don't like recovery. And that's meant a lot to me over the years. I've met a lot of different types of folks in recovery, some that I would never hang out with outside, some that I would absolutely and have become my best friends, but we're all on the same road.
One of the things that I think Moby and Natalie have been touching upon is correlation between your journeys early on and how you were able to achieve recovery, and what the conduit was to you entering that world. And you talked about certain things like sponsor and home group, and sobriety dates. And so, that's certain language that some people might not understand what that means. Moby, I think you touched upon this in your essay in Sober 21, of the interview that you did with Elia, how in 12-step programs, there are certain traditions that talk about, press, media, things of that nature. And so I just want to mention, kind of as a disclaimer, each of you are talking about your personal experiences, and there is so much value and richness to those experiences. But just to kind of like give people some insight to what a sponsor is, what that means, home group, and what those things represented to you.
Sorry.
Yeah, if you want to tackle that one.
One thing I did want to mention is, and it sort of ties in to, from my perspective, what's quite an important issue is that of dogma. Like, for example, the tradition you're referring to, anonymity at press, radio, and I guess at that point it was like wax cylinder and telegraph. But the irony there is Bill W. was completely non-anonymous. And it's such a tricky thing, because some of my favorite sober stories, some of the most inspirational stories I've heard from sober people are not anonymous. Like Anthony Hopkins, like, I love his sober stories, and he's not anonymous. He's out there. He's like, my name's Tony. I'm an alcoholic. And I remember the first real meeting I went to, this super tough guy pulled me aside after the meeting, and he was like, started yelling at me. He was like, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do that. He relapsed the next day. So what I will say to newcomers is those nice words on the coin, to thine own self be true. People are going to tell you what to do. People are going to yell at you. People are going to be dogmatic. It's your journey, and even sponsors know a little, but they don't know everything. And sponsors are just as crazy as we are. They just have maybe a little more experience being slightly more on the road to recovery. So I just wanted to, I know a lot of people get freaked out by the dogma, by what seems like rigidity, what seems like, a theocracy in a way. And to thine own self be true. Like, it's your journey. No one can tell you, no one should tell you what you should do or how to live it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, like, AA is just like a microcosm of the real world. They're gonna be people who are loving and kind, and they're gonna be, assholes and all kinds of, and all the, like, in the in between. I mean, like, for me, like, I sponsor people, and my job is to, take them through the 12 steps and give them tools so that they can have their own spiritual experience. Sometimes they kind of get annoyed with me because they want me to tell them what to do, and I'm like, here are your tools. I'm giving you tools, but it's your own experience. Go have your experience. You know what I mean? That's what my sponsors did for me. They gave me the tools and they let me have my own experience of life. And I don't want to. I like to learn the hard way. Um,
Test the
and
waters.
yeah. But I've been very lucky in which I've had a lot of great sponsors and people in my recovery who who just have given me, like, I do my thing, and I have hard lessons, and people have been very just loving and supportive, and also it's like, take what you want and leave the rest. You know what I mean? I love that line. Not everyone needs to do it the same. And also in our literature, it says we don't have a monopoly over how to get sober. This is one way. It works for me. Obviously, it worked for you guys as well. But, like, you got to have, your own sober experience. And
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say from my personal experience, there was so much value in having guidance from someone who could say, like, hey, this is how I was able to, walk the walk. This is how I was able to achieve, a life beyond my wildest dreams. Someone who was just beaten down and broken, and now today is living a fulfilling life. And as someone who was getting sober, I needed to have a frame of reference for what the other side could look like, because all I knew was the darkness. All I knew was just tragedy. All I knew was just, a bleak existence. And having individuals who could say, like, hey, this is what's on the other side at the very least, and this is what we were able to do to get there. And there's so many different communities that exist out there that can be that frame of reference. And Natalie, thank you so much for mentioning, 12-step programs don't have a monopoly on recovery, but they certainly have been an incredibly powerful movement and organization that have helped so many millions of people get sober. But there's so many other ways, and MusiCares is able to help connect people whatever way they feel would be best fitting for their needs. I don't know if Elia, you wanted to touch on any of that stuff.
Well, it's funny. When I was first putting Sober 21 together, I thought, I know that Alcoholics Anonymous has this third tradition, which respects anonymity at the level of press, radio, and film. And so I'll just do that, just, because a lot of the people in it are sober. And it was actually my interview with Moby for it that made me rethink that, because what Moby was saying, and you hear it in the pieces, I actually need to see this stuff. I need people to talk about it. And it really was interesting. And I thought, well, each person can speak about it however they want. To thine own self be true. And I was thinking, as Maluka was just speaking about, like, the different recovery communities that I've been able to hook up with around the world. Like, I've hooked up with folks when I was living in Chile for a minute. I celebrated my 22nd sober anniversary in New Delhi, India. I mean, it's like, with sober Indian folks out there, it was incredible. I mean, it's just amazing to be able to go anywhere in the world, and there's sober people. And I was just interviewed a couple days ago for this new podcast called Sober Dad Crew, and he was asking me, like, what do you recommend for people? And I was like, look, in my experience working with, like, hundreds or thousands of people, AA is free. AA is free. Like, rehab can be complicated and really expensive, and it did a lot of good for me. I was lucky that insurance covered it, right? But a lot of people, I didn't have insurance for a lot of my touring life, and AA is free, and it works. And Brendan, as you know, when Sober 21 for me was a passion project. I didn't take any money from it. Nobody who wrote essays or did interviews with me took any money for it. It was a service project, right? And we donated the money for the publication that the Creative Independent gave us to MusiCares, and we earmarked it for people to get help who needed help from addiction. So I mean, you guys were the people that I trusted the most to be able to help someone outside of just showing up at a meeting.
And also, like, speaking on anonymity, like, I'm so grateful that there are folks like Moby or now Rogers or other musicians who broke their anonymity, because it can be very lonely to think I'm the only one. I'm the only crazy person. I'm such a whatever. And to have people say, in music, right? I'm sober, and I have this life. I'm still making music. I'm still touring. I'm not. It didn't like end me, my sobriety. And also knowing, like, I know the hardships of getting sober. So Moby wouldn't have to say, I'm sober and I went through this and I went through hard. Like, I already know, and I'm like, wow, someone like that, like, went through it, the depths of hell, and came out and they're thriving, So thank you.
Well, I think that's a wonderful point. And it's one of the things that I found really revelatory when I started going to meetings for real and doing the steps it was realizing that up until sobriety, I thought everybody in the world had their shit together.
Oh.
And I thought everybody in the world was scary. And I thought I was the only sort of frightened, vulnerable person on the planet. Like I'm the only person who gets drunk and cries himself to sleep at night. Like, everybody else knows what they're doing. And it was so wonderful. Well, doing the 4th, 5th, and 6th steps and realizing, like, oh, these are the things I'm most ashamed of. And when my sponsor went through it, his response to these horrible things that I was so ashamed of, he was like, yeah, me too. And I was like, oh, I'm not the only one. And sitting in meetings and watching tough guys cry, watching hipsters admit their vulnerability, watching attractive people admit that they weren't that confident, I was like, oh, I'm not alone in this experience of the human condition. Like, I remember this huge turning point for me. There was this one guy at Living Now at the 1 p.m. meetings I went to, and he was the toughest of the tough. I'm sure you've all encountered those guys, like the guys where you're like, they smell scary, like when they exhale, you assume like nails are going to come out of their mouth, like Smog from The Hobbit. And he started crying and admitting his vulnerabilities. And I was like, what a form of service, like showing up, being honest, being vulnerable. It was so transformational for me to realize, like, the human condition affects all of us. It affects the hipsters, it affects the investment bankers, it affects the cops, it affects everybody. We're all scared and we're all in it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
if you had a mic, you could drop it, man.
I'll just drop my phone.
Maluka, you were about to say something.
No, I was just saying, right before I got sober, I had like just resigned to life, and my best thinking was like, I'm not gonna do music anymore because like I can't make it to sessions. Like, I just can't think. I'm not gonna have kids because I don't want to bring them into this disaster. And I thought, I am going to marry a trader on Wall Street who moonlights as a drug dealer with the cartel at night, and I'm gonna live in Tribeca, and I'm gonna like drink wine and do drugs and do yoga. Like, that's what I thought. And when I got sober, like I didn't think I could, navigate the music industry. I just didn't think I could do it. I didn't think like my writing was any good, and I was just like, I suck. I'm gonna be a yoga teacher, and so I went to, or I'm gonna be a shaman, as a bunch of people, I'm gonna, and so I did. I went to yoga school, and then I would teach, the nightlife kids yoga, like at nightclubs, and then I was still making music, and it was and then it just like came pouring out of me, and I'm like, okay, I'm not horrible, I'm kind of okay, and shit happens, but now I'm just like, I'm doing like the best work I feel like I've ever done in my music career. I'm so like excited, and when people talking about channeling music, I never felt that I was like channeling, and I'm like, oh wow, I yeah, like I feel like I'm channeling, and I'm making the best music I've ever made.
Um, yeah,
I know we only. Oh, please.
I just and getting into that, I guess Moby and Elia, can either of you or both of you speak to what your experiences have been like touring, being in the studio, that creative process, writing, collaborating with other artists, and how you navigate all of those spaces as people in recovery.
I write about this in my own essay in Sober 21. One thing I write about is that a lot of the things that you feel like you have to be a part of, you actually don't. Like, for example, if people are getting fucked up, if people are getting messed up, you can just step out for a minute. You can just be like, oh yeah, I have to make a phone call. You know what I mean? And if you don't feel comfortable there, you don't have to be there usually. But yeah, man, I mean, for me, it's a little bit different, I think, than for the other folks on the panel, because my whole career happened sober. I was on the fast track. I got sober young. My whole career happened. So the goods, the bads, everything, totally sober. Now, I will say, for me, it was sobriety that was the foundation that enabled me to do everything, that enabled me to put the band together, sign the record deal, hit the road, have those successes, and also to weather the rough times, And so it's interesting. I mean, even in my, I still release music, but of course I speak to many, many more people through my interviews these days. And there's occasionally situations where it's a little awkward with someone who's like super intoxicated, or I do a lot of work at festivals. Like last month, I was at Pitchfork Fest hosting the interview stage, so I'm around a lot of drink and, drugs and stuff. But I feel like, honestly, I can go anywhere. It kind of gets to what Moby was talking about earlier about, like, I know in my heart that I am a drug addict, and alcohol is a drug. So for me, I'm a drug addict. I have zero question about that. So within reason, I can go anywhere in the world, collaborate with anyone, interview anyone, do anything, be anywhere. A lot of the time I'm in bars and clubs more than normal people because I'm out seeing shows, and I can do any of that sober. Yeah, man. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.
And one thing, because I know that, people who are watching this, a bunch of them might be creative musicians, artists. And I know there is a fear among newcomers and even old timers about like sobriety diminishing or attenuating or compromising the creative process. And I don't mean this as a cliche, but for me, the exact opposite happened. Like before I got sober, I've been making music since I was 9 years old, and I loved music, but I also loved controlling my career. I loved trying to figure out, am I with the right publicist? What's the right radio edit for this? Like, it was this vicious control. And when I got sober, I realized, like, oh, I'm so afraid of the world that I feel like I need to control everything. They talk about it in the big book, like the person who arranges the ballet. And once I got sober, I realized a couple of things that make so much sense to me now, but at the time seemed so foreign. One, the world doesn't need my control. Like, the world is a hugely complicated chaos system that I can't control. Two, I was terrible at controlling the world. Like the more I tried to control things, the worse everything became. And when I started looking at the evidence of that, like when I tried to control my career, when I tried to control relationships, everything, it was terrible. And so I realized I'm bad at controlling things, and the universe is 16 billion years old and comprised of 300 trillion galaxies. Like, I can't control that. Like, why should I even try? And also, the underlying premise behind control for me was fear. You know, this fear that I'm inadequate and the world needs, in order for me to fit in, I have to control everything. And so creatively, once I shed the control, the need to control, it's still there a little bit. But once I largely shed that, I could work on creativity for the sake of creativity. You know, I could work on music for the sake of music, and people like it, great. If they don't, it's not my problem, you know? And I could focus also on the idea of service, of being honest, of going out and trying to use platforms or financial resources or creativity to somehow be of service. And these were such foreign concepts pre-sobriety. And now it's created a creative world, at least for me, that is so much more expansive and rich. And I had no idea that was going to be one of the wonderful consequences of sobriety.
I actually used one of your songs to open up my shows, the Ultimate Fuck song. And I would use that to open up my shows for a really long time.
I'll sue. Yeah. Damn it. How dare you?
But yeah, I mean, you know, there are so many creative people in who are sober, and so many musicians who are sober. So I would just, like, you know, I make friends in sobriety, and I just drag one of my sober friends with me, you know. You're coming with me to my show, you know, or I remember I was performing at Berghain for the first time, and I was sober. I was like, just my luck. You know what I mean? It's like, it was my dream to, like, go to Berghain and, like, get just obliterated, you know?
That's the club in Berlin where they turned Elon Musk away, right?
I don't know.
For those who don't know, that's like one of the most hedonistic nightclubs in the world. I went there on Christmas once, totally sober. It was fun. But yeah.
I was terrified. I was like 3 months sober, 4 months, like very new, like shaking in my boots. I was like backstage, you know. I was with Robin, and she was like the only person. I was terrified, and this big old drag queen comes up to me, and she's like, "Honey, what's going on?" And I'm like, "I'm really sober. I'm scared. I'm terrified. I'm like, oh." She's like, "I'm sober too." And she just took care of me the whole night. She had like a bunch of years sober, and you know what I mean? Just like things like that have happened a lot.
Yep. Yeah, I would say no one has to believe in God. You can be an atheist, but when I hear stories like that, I'm like, there is some energy. I call it the divine God, whatever, but like you can't look at the intricacies and the sort of self-sustaining aspects of the universe and not see that energy that you just described as I mean, that's happened. I'm sure it's happened to all of us so many times. And every time it happens, we're like, oh, there's something else going on. There's something bigger than me at work here.
And look at that too. Like, you know, back when I would like my DJ, we would open up the set with your song. Like, I didn't know you were sober back then. Do you know what I mean? And just like that, I don't know, but the kids are calling this energy Sky Daddy. Have you heard of that?
Yeah,
that's the new word, Sky Daddy,
or Sky Zaddy. Yeah,
exactly.
One quick thing. Sorry for monopolizing too much time, but oftentimes when I work with sponsees regarding going out to places where people are drinking and doing drugs, I'll actually take sponsees to a bar at 1 or 2 in the morning, because
that's amazing.
When people are drinking at the beginning or doing drugs at the beginning, it seems like the greatest thing in the world. You know, like the first 3 lines, the first 3 drinks, oh boy, is that attractive. but show up a little later. Show up at the bar at 2 or 3 in the morning, and you realize people who are wasted, it's gross. And then you realize, like, when I was wasted, I was gross. Like, I was that person at 3 a.m. stumbling around like an idiotic toddler, and it's really nice to sort of show newcomers, like, this is where it goes. Like, it's not the glamour and the sexy attraction of the first couple of drinks or the first few lines or the first few pills. It's where it ends up. And at least for me, when I was getting sober, one of the hardest things was admitting that no matter how the night began, it always ended the exact same way. Sickness and despair, and in my case, like, a lot of suicidal thoughts. And just, so you have to remember, like, the beginning always leads to that end. At least that was a huge part of my recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I love that you take sponsees out to the bar like that, to the club, man. And
I'm gonna start doing that. It's amazing.
I know we only have a few more minutes together here on the panel, and I just want to shout out to those who are just kind of coming across Sober 21, or maybe haven't had time to read the whole thing. Like, what we really set out to do with that was to take on a lot of these questions that are specific to life in music, specific to life in the arts. So, like, Jen Champion wrote about, like, how do you go to the bar but not end up with like a huge pint glass of Diet Coke? Like, you can ask for a rocks glass, you know what I mean, with your drink and a lime, for example, so that nobody's asking you these little things, right? But also, like Nile Rodgers talked about, because of course he's famous for collaborations. And so I said, Nile, how did you get back to collaborating sober? And each of these topics that I think have come up today just organically are represented by people in Sober 21. Richard Lloyd from television echoed what Moby was saying. He said, man, I rip solos. That was his quote. I rip solos now that I never could have ripped, when I was looking at my shoes falling over on stage with television. And it's powerful to hear that stuff, right? And again, for folks who are new to sobriety, life is not perfect just because you get sober, but the ability to make an amazing life becomes possible, and that foundation is there. And so, whether that's coming to MusiCares and asking for help, right? Whether that's going to the meeting, whether that's starting with Sober 21 and reading about other people's experience, it is possible. When Brendan and I were talking about putting this panel together, one of the most important things for us is, if you see it, you can be it, And the four of us here, just for today, we are sober music professionals, and it's working.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to say, Elia, just hearing your journey, like, when I got sober pretty young, and not only did I think that was like the end of my life, but I thought, all right, any shot I have of being able to create music professionally, it's over. That's the end of it. And I was like, I don't know anyone who got sober and then was able to establish a career for themselves in music. And, you did that. And, feel like I've been able to do that for myself at this point. But it's
got that Grammy, baby.
Wherever you're at in your career or in your journey with music and in the arts, like, it's possible. And I so deeply appreciate each of you being so vulnerable today and sharing these intimate parts of your lives, in and outside of music, and what that journey looked like. It's so powerful and so meaningful. And, just today, I know it's touched my life, and I know it's going to touch a lot of other people's lives. So I'm so grateful for you all being here and having this conversation. That's so important.
And also, go ahead, Moby, go ahead.
And I was just going to share one last thing hopefully that might be helpful to newcomers is, so we keep coming back to this, like, what do you do in the early days when you're uncomfortable, when the sobriety is new and unfamiliar? And I had about a week sober, and I went to this bar on Avenue C called New Blue. I don't know, Maluka, if you ever used to go to New Blue.
Yeah. Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
I loved New Blue, and I went there sober for the first time, and I was so bored and so sad and so lonely. And I was like, what am I going to do? Like, is this sobriety? is like, I was like, is this, so sobriety is going to be sitting in bars, being bored and lonely and sad and drinking club soda out of a rocks glass. Not to malign club soda and rocks glasses. It's a delicious sober cocktail. But I was sitting there and I was like, oh, I'll go to the bathroom. So I went downstairs to go to the bathroom where I had done drugs more times than any human being could ever count. And I walked into the bathroom, and God, however you Sky Zaddy, had graffitied the bathroom, and there was a big gold graffiti on the wall, and this saved me. It said, simply trust your struggle. And I took a picture of it and I kept it on my phone. And whenever I was doubting, I looked at that and I was like, trust your struggle. Everyone's going through it. But as an old timer said to me early on, don't quit before the miracle happens. Like, read the 9-step promises and believe to the core of your being that if they haven't come true, they absolutely will. So please, to the newcomers, stick with it, because it will work out if you do the work.
And I was just gonna say quickly that, you know, you're right. Life is not gonna be perfect just because you get sober. I thought life was gonna be perfect when I got sober. You know, like I said, I was on a pink carpet ride, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is it. I'm gonna get sober. I'm gonna win a Grammy. And it didn't happen like that. You know, I had a lot of trials and tribulations. I had to leave a very toxic relationship with my managers and the label, and it was very scary. And I was making music and they were shelving my music, and you know, so I had to get out of that situation. And I didn't, you know, I'm a 30-something-year-old woman, and I don't know, like, I didn't know how to do it. Do you know what I mean? I just didn't know how to like navigate the music industry, you know? And I started asking for help, you know what I mean? And I didn't win that Grammy yet, but like now, you know, back then music was like a job. It felt like you get on stage, you do this, and it just felt like a puppet, like somebody was pulling the string, you do the show, blah, 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 you know? And it was like, it was not fun. It wasn't fun anymore. And like now it's fun, you know, and I make music just to make music. If people like it, awesome. Like I used to, you know, forget it. I used to feel like I had a gun to my head that was like, if you don't make a #1 song, you're fucking dead. That's no fun, you know, or ruminating about what is Bjork gonna think about this record. It's just like, who is Bjork gonna like this? You know, it's like, who cares? You know? And it's just like, now I'm just having fun, you know, and I'm able to collaborate. Before it was so closed. I don't like your idea, and this is not Maluka. It's like, I don't even know what you don't know what Maluka likes. Just make the music, you know? And so that's what sobriety has gifted me in my career, is the ability to have fun and to play and not be so caught up with like the results, and having and to be able to collaborate with others. Like I love making music with other people. It's just so much fun.
One of the gifts of my sobriety is having been able to work with Bjork many times. And she once kidnapped me at Primavera and, you know, get in the van with my squad, and we're going to go see Fever Ray. And she's like, you want some champagne? They're all drinking champagne. And I was able to say, oh, no, cool. No, I'm cool on champagne, thanks. But I had a beautiful night out with Bjork and co. You wouldn't even know who was drinking and who wasn't drinking. You know, these are the gifts of sobriety, man. Yeah.
This feels like a good natural place to land. Thank you all again so much for doing this.